Welcome to another TezTalks Radio, where we dive deeper into the stories and motivations of the contributors and members of the Tezos Ecosystem. I'm your host, William McKenzie of Tezos Commons, and we're joined with our other co-host, Brian Lee of Tezos Commons, and Rob Witoff of Polychain Labs. How's everything going, guys?
Great, William. Nice to be connected here. We've had some good conversations over the years in crypto and over the years in Tezos. So I think we've got some good stuff to catch up on today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm doing great as well. Very excited to dive into Rob's background and many things happening in the ecosystem now. But before we get into all of that, first we want to talk about your background. So we did some research, as we always do. And it looks like you've been a part of quite a few companies in the past, Coinbase and Google as well, and even NASA, which I guess isn't really a company. But can you talk about your background and basically how you got into crypto?
Yeah, sure thing. So I've always been a sucker for hard and interesting problems, and I haven't had a lot of patience for working on something that I didn't think had a huge mission behind it. And when I was first feeling like I was obligated to get a job somewhere, aerospace engineering seemed hard, it seemed exciting. And I eventually got a job at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And there was this great project that I was able to spend most of my time there on called the Optical Payload for Laser Science, or the OPALS project. And I was the space station integration lead and got to spend 4 years trying to figure out how to put a class 4 or a high-powered laser safely on the first SpaceX rocket to fly to the International Space Station, and then mount to the outside of the space station without causing an international incident. And a lot of what that had me thinking about is, how do you manage risk for an asset that you've never thought to protect against before? What happens when an astronaut looks out the window on the space station with an 88x monocular that has a specular reflection off the solar array? And that's what really got me thinking, I think a little more critically, and kind of trained me to help protect crypto assets or work with new networks that nobody had really worked with before. The whole time I was there, I was crazy about cryptocurrency and kind of counting down the days before I got to work on a cryptocurrency project full time.
What year was that, if you don't mind me asking, when you were working at the JPL?
Yeah, I started there in 2009, and I was there until 2012. I was real close to leaving to go work at Coinbase, but ultimately decided my time wasn't done. So I spent a couple of years working for the CT over there, which is incredible. And in 2014, I couldn't push off Coinbase any longer and finally went to go work at Coinbase, which was a great experience.
Cool. Yeah. So when you were at Coinbase, what did you do there?
So in true Coinbase fashion, so I was hired as the head of data science at Coinbase. The Sunday before I started, Brian called me, asked me if I wouldn't mind taking over infrastructure for a little while. And being the head of infrastructure and the head of security while I was there. So I moved us. I designed new hardened cloud environments and runtime environments, and all of the infrastructure, and then the tools that secured that infrastructure while I was there over about a 3-year period.
The next thing that we wanted to talk about, Rob, was slashing and double endorsing. Polychain Labs has slashed more people on Tezos than any other baker. Could you kind of explain what slashing is and double endorsing, and get into any interesting stories you might have with Polychain Labs?
Sure. So I can talk about this from a few different directions, because it's important to know what we sort of do at Polychain Labs. And we think of ourselves as one of the more mature teams that builds real secure infrastructure. And where we're building this secure proof of stake infrastructure so we can participate in networks, we try to be there on the first day that a network launches so we can be a good participant. It's really important to me that we're not just sitting on the sidelines. We want to be there helping power the network, helping push the network forward. And if we can contribute to the network in some way, we want to do that too. We're not trying to find a small edge over some other staking operation. We all win when when the networks we work with have a better design, have more scalability, have better security. So that's why we try to contribute and open source and work with lots of people in the community wherever we can. And so in order to do that properly, participate at scale when a network launches at the beginning, there's often a ton of unknowns. You don't know if the network is even going to make it through the first day or the first week. You don't know what's going to happen through the first upgrade. You don't know if the software that's been shipped still has some bugs in it that haven't been fleshed out yet when the network launches. And so we don't try to reinvent the blockchain. We don't typically build our own nodes or clients. What we do instead is we spend a lot of time monitoring the hell out of the software we're running, our infrastructure, but also monitoring the network. And so if something interesting is happening on the network, I want to know about it before anybody else. And we've got a ton of tooling we built, and we've open sourced. One of those pieces, our Tezos Network Monitor, we call it, that I know a number of people are using to monitor their own infrastructures and monitor the network as well. And so the place we're sort of starting from here is we've got eyes on everything. Just because we want to know, is the network healthy? Is there something we need to do? Or is there something interesting happening on the network that maybe we can participate in too? So that's one. So then your question, what is slashing on the network? So there are a couple sort of fundamental challenges that Arthur solved designing Tezos in the proof of stake model here. And one was the nothing at stake problem. And so for those not familiar with the nothing at stake problem, if you're running a baker on a network or a validator, as they're often called, and it looks like there's potentially a fork of the blockchain, well, acting as a rational actor, you want to make sure you're maximizing your rewards. And you get rewards for baking or endorsing and publishing those operations and seeing those ultimately included in a block on chain. And as a rational actor trying to maximize outcomes, what you're incentivized to do is if you see a fork of the chain and there are two different blocks to bake, well, if you want to maximize the chance you're going to get the rewards associated with that, you're incentivized to bake both of those blocks or to endorse all the blocks you see coming in. So if there are two blocks that get broadcast to you at the same height and you have an opportunity to endorse those blocks, then you're incentivized normally to endorse both. And this presents a problem because it would normally force chain to fan out and have infinite permutations and forks. And so the way this is addressed, this nothing at stake problem, is by putting something at stake. And the thing you have at stake here is the bond you put in place that'll get slashed if you bake or endorse multiple blocks at the same height with the same chain ID. So where we're coming in here is we're monitoring the heck out of our networks, and there's this nothing at stake problem that's addressed with this rule that you can't bake or endorse two blocks at the same height. And so what I think you're referencing is on chain about maybe 6 to 12 months ago, we noticed that for the first time ever, there was someone that had double endorsed on chain. And the way we actually caught this was I'd never seen a double endorsement before. We had never been able to simulate one on a test net, because for this to work, you need two blocks at the same height and you need rights to endorse, and the endorsements both have to be propagated, and somebody has to submit the attestation evidence that you've done wrong. And so I wasn't aware of what this looked like. We didn't have a sample payload for what a double endorsement looked like. We didn't have a test. We didn't have good code to alert on that. So what we did see that day was we saw an operation broadcast to the chain that we'd never seen before. And that paged us. We took a look at it and we saw this rare double endorsing event had happened. So with that, the first thing we did was, again, remember, we're not here to get a small edge and efficiency over someone else. We're here to make the whole chain safer and more effective. So the first thought I had was, well, something's going wrong. Let me go help this person. So reached out to that baker in a couple channels. There was some good discussion in the baking Slack channels about this. Try to get in touch to help that person out. For whatever reason, we couldn't get in touch. And there was one person that immediately or pretty quickly slashed them when they double endorse. But now there's this other rule on the network that if you double endorse within a cycle, any other deposits you put in place in that cycle for the rest of the cycle can also be slashed as well.
Right.
But it's not something the default accuser will do on the network. So we saw that as a missing piece of engineering for the network. So with some sharp members on the team here, we wrote a little piece of software and we helped make the network a little more efficient for the rest of that day. And there just happened to be a couple dozen opportunities to broadcast that. But that, just to be clear, that was after doing what we see as our primary obligation, which is trying to help out the actor on the network. And then we filled in the missing pieces of engineering on the network.
Yeah, so I think it's very important for blockchain networks to have people like you who are constantly watching. And it almost makes me think like you wouldn't really have caught this unless like you were so in depth, right? And it makes me think if there are actually blockchains out there where this kind of stuff is happening in the background and no one really knows because no one is really watching, like now that you really mentioned this, I do think that could definitely be the case.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. You see other events like the Coinbase security team detected some coordinated reorgs, I think on one of the older Bitcoin forks not too long ago. And there are really good engineering problems here. I find this really satisfying. I think in order to be a really great operator, you can't just build the infrastructure and move on. You have to go as deep as you reasonably can.
Yeah.
And there's few things better than, in my opinion, really understanding just what kind of information on chain, what kind of information is in the blockchain. What do the APIs look like? What do the interfaces look like? And when you see that, you start to, I think it helps you think more creatively about just what could be built. You see what you can easily monitor. You can now build better internal integrations, better dashboards. You have a better idea for who's actively using the network and how they're using it. So something that I've gotten pretty excited about recently is I'm now building dashboards about what the real world usage is like for these chains. So what do the contracts deployed look like? How many unique addresses there are? And I think we're sort of getting into a world where you can see really interesting things that I hope are completely confidential and private in the future, but they're not quite there yet.
So earlier you mentioned you guys open sourced a tool for bakers to essentially watch the network. So that was the Tezos node monitor, right?
I think we call it our Tezos network monitor.
Oh, okay. Can you maybe spend a few minutes just talking about like what kind of stuff that tool can watch out for? I'm just interested myself because I also like to run nodes.
Yeah, so the first thing our monitors always look at is, so you need to point it to some node. First thing it looks at is the node you're talking to in sync? So we've got a little bit of logic there. And we have it integrated with Slack and PagerDuty, but it's pretty modular. So you can integrate with Telegram if you want a bot, or there's the Tezos Telegram notifier bot team that's already done a good job with that. You can use too. So lets you know if your nodes are falling behind. Then it'll look at whenever there are transfers from addresses that you've whitelisted. So something I always want to know is if money's ever moving from one of my accounts. It better be because someone on my team has intentionally planned to do something. If money's moving when you're not expecting it, that's probably something you want to know. So it does a nice job for that. It also keeps an index of baking and endorsing rights. So if you start to miss above a certain threshold, it'll alert for that. I think there's another probably 10 or 12 unique things it'll look at. What I hope is most useful for people is there's a pretty general and extendable Golang API around all of this. So if you want to alert on something else, by all means, it's pretty well tested software. There's a Golang wrapper around the Tezos RPC inside of it. So I hope it's really easy, but if it's not, let me know.
Yeah, no, I was just really wondering about that. It kind of sounds like a tool that I built for the Icon network, actually. It's definitely not as in-depth as what you had built, but in terms of like checking to make sure like the block height is in sync and all of that. Yeah, that was pretty useful, and we use that tool to watch over our nodes as well.
Yeah, that can be so valuable. And I think it's worth noting too, so I don't know if you open sourced your tool, but with monitors out there, if you need something and there's open source software, please by all means go and take it, use it, abuse it, do whatever you want with. But I think the more important thing is if you're going to run a node or run a large baking operation, go and build it yourself. There's no substitute for really getting your hands dirty and figuring out really what's going on under the hood. And I would guess when you built that for Icon, you probably left that with just a much better understanding of what's actually happening on the network.
Yeah, I did. And like the process of completely like building out the nodes myself. So we're using GCP right now for most of our stuff, and just trying to dig in and learn all of that and learn whitelisting, SSL stuff, how to route traffic towards like certain nodes depending on what part of the world you're in. And all of that stuff was just like really fascinating because right now my background, I actually work in web hosting. So it's like kind of the same thing, but completely not. It's kind of the same thing as in like I do have some background in like at least deploying stuff to the cloud. But in terms of actually all the stuff that's like past that first step, yeah, it was really cool to just learn all about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you point out there are two really interestingly different career paths working as an engineer in the cryptocurrency world, where a lot of people come in and this is what I did when I went to work at Coinbase. I thought I was going to go there and become an expert on blockchain and Bitcoin primitives. I really went there and became an expert on AWS. That's what I left to understand.
Right.
You can spend so much time just learning the infrastructure around it. I think for these monitors in particular, it's often the closest chance you have to really work directly with the blockchain's APIs and really get a feel for, depending on the chain, what finality is like, how to treat that, what breaks when you pull a blockhead that's not the real blockhead or it's not yet confirmed. So it's a really good front row seat.
Yeah. And, without the necessary infrastructure behind it, most of these networks are going to fall straight to the ground. And I think for me, the progress is pretty cool to see because when I first got into it, I was trying to log into the website, I click and I want to like launch a node in this part of the world. And I just click. Right. But by the end of it, I was really thinking like, okay, but what if I had to launch a node like right now? And I didn't have time to click all of this because someone was trying to like attack my nodes and I have to scale up. So, by the end of, I don't know, we were in testnet for a few months. And by the end, I was able to like put it all into code, and just click a button and it deploys all of these nodes for me. And I was like, oh, this is super cool. And this is like the way how you're actually supposed to do it.
And isn't that so satisfying too, when you get to a point of automation where you can not only launch the thing you wanted, but when something breaks, you can fall back on that. And hopefully it's resilient enough to recover from the failure fast too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you recall the talk that Luke Youngblood gave? I forget which conference, but it was a Tezos conference about the machines that build the machines.
No, I don't think I saw that.
Okay, yeah, this I think was spot on. So he was drawing a parallel to it at Tesla. Elon's spoken a lot about investing in the robots that are building the cars so they can get the scalability they've gotten to. And the real challenge for them sometimes has not been building the cars, it's building machines to build the cars for them. And I think it's the same for large infrastructures here, where one of the core principles that I've had since I got into cryptocurrency, and I think every large operation has to have is the two-man rule. You can't have one person with unilateral access to a really large or a really valuable production environment, but at the same time, you want one person to feel really productive and empowered. So I think there's a great set of trade-offs here when you're designing your infrastructure, certainly for a larger operation. And so a lot of the challenge is the upfront investment in figuring out what is it you need to build, how can you automate it, how can you really empower individuals to access this, but at the same time, how do you make sure your keys are always safe, right? And something that I think Tezos got really right, and we've been trying to communicate far and wide as a best practice that everyone should be following, is Tezos launched with a Baker that you could put keys directly into, but it also had a Tezos signer binary. If you recall, after you compile all of the growing number of Tezos binaries, you get a Tezos signer that you can run locally or you can run remotely. And if you run remotely, you can encapsulate all of your real network participation risk just into the remote signer. And Luke and I and Bo and a few other people have built HSM-backed remote signing interfaces. You can shove your keys into a hardware security module purpose to just protect that key. You can also use a ledger or some custom interfaces. And then you can sort of relax protections around your Baker and your endorser without worrying about your infrastructure signing a malicious payload that could cause some harm to you or the network. And so that kind of segmentation, I think, allows us to still move fast on the infrastructure side while still having a secure setup. And then we have to think about reliability and some other tenets too.
Awesome. Like, now that we're talking about infrastructure and all of that, let's dive in a bit more. And can you talk a little bit about the technologies that you use? So, for example, like on your website, you do block production for a number of networks out there. Internally, like, if you're gonna launch a node on a new network, what does that process look from the beginning all the way up to the actual deployment phase?
Yeah, that's a big, broad question. That's a great topic. So first and foremost, we want networks to be themselves. So I don't want Tezos to have to look like a Bitcoin or Polkadot to have to look like a Tezos. These are different networks, and the most exciting thing in crypto right now, or one of the more exciting things to be, is we're exploring brand new ideas, and that's good. And we're not done exploring yet. Just in the same way, we're not done upgrading Tezos. The self-amending ledger is meant to change. And I don't ever want to be in a position where we say, well, there's a great idea for how to upgrade the consensus mechanism, but we just won't have that conversation because we're too baked into SHA-256 or something that may have come from another blockchain. So we want Tezos to be uniquely Tezos. And some things that are uniquely Tezos are not the strict liveness requirements that other chains' consensus mechanisms have to have. Tezos is scalable to more bakers than lots of other people have, and that's a great thing. So first and foremost, learn about what a network, how a network's designed, what the unique trade-offs are, and then we try to adapt to them instead of the other way around. Something I really like about what we do is we're not trying to force fit lots of chains into one web interface or one wallet. We build unique infrastructures for unique networks based on what's most appropriate for them. So for Tezos, we've evolved a little bit over the period in which we've been operating it, where we often use a lot of cloud to the extent it's appropriate. We use some AWS, we use some GCP, but we also have a data center that we can use where, again, it's appropriate. It's often a lot harder to manage availability and reliability in our own data center because we have a team of hundreds of 24/7 round the clock SREs or hardware teams like
you need to get some interns.
A full global intern army. If people want to intern for the Polychain Labs ops intern army reach out.
Just watch this hard drive all day.
And so here's a good example again, where because you can take a remote signer on Tezos, encapsulate that, and that's really where the security risk is. So we can focus on hardening that piece. And then for our front nodes, we run probably a dozen front nodes now that are distributed all over the world, largely through cloud providers that allow us to get really good connectivity. And so if there was a regional outage or a multi-regional outage, we still want to be connected with other bakers on the network. We still want to keep the network moving forward. A lot harder for me to build a team to run data centers all over the world than to just use cloud. So we do have a lot of cloud nodes. We do use an HSM. So we use a cloud HSM for our baking keys on Tezos. We've been pretty public about that. And so one of the other open source projects we have is the Tezos HSM signer, I think we call it. Which is what establishes a PKCS11 interface with the Cloud HSM, so our keys are protected, and that will parse out pretty granularly things and operations you've whitelisted. So you can, for example, whitelist a withdraw request and still be able to transfer funds out of that, but only up to a certain amount with a certain rate limit to a certain destination address. And that kind of granularity keeps us moving fast with as little risk as possible to our operation.
Awesome. So I think a lot of people maybe in the community don't know too much about the infrastructure side. So when you say front nodes, are those nodes essentially just to keep sync with the network and allows your baker to sync to those nodes?
Yeah. So the way you typically, or the way this is typically run is so you can have kind of a 4-tier infrastructure here where you want to keep your keys as protected as possible. Your keys can then be accessed by a remote signer. And ideally, your keys are in some custom HSM with firmware that's fully protecting this. And so this is where a lot of the work is that we're doing today on the Tezos network. So keys and a remote signer, and then a baker that can talk to those keys to request blocks and endorsements to be signed. The baker, we run directly next to a full node. I believe you can do this remotely. There are just some performance challenges with doing that efficiently at our scale. But I don't want to expose our baker to the public internet. It's really a certainty that every couple years there are really nasty vulnerabilities that come out that allow you to get into a box. This is like Heartbleed of years yonder, Spectre and Meltdown if you're running multi-tenant environments. And there will always be more. There's always going to be another speculative execution. And so rather than exposing your baker directly to the public internet, you put proxies in front of it. So our baker is peered with a number of front nodes, and you can tier that as many times as you want. You just take the cost of added latency. And then for our front nodes, the sort of calculus here is that when the next internet scale vulnerability comes out, sure, someone may be able to get into our front nodes, but we have really good instrumentation and hardening and different types of containment and automation that should let us know that, hey, something real fishy is happening on a front node before someone can get into our next tier and our next tier and our next tier to make sure we continue to operate safely.
Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of like the way that I do it too. Glad to hear that I'm on the right path, I guess.
Tezos has made this, I think, pretty easy to do right. And I'm continually impressed by the other bakers in the community. I think we've got one of the healthier communities, which I still love. People are really supportive, lots of really sharp engineers, but also really open to helping new people get set up. So I worked with a number of people to help them get their new baking operations off the ground. And that feels really good to see more decentralization coming into the network.
Yeah, it's always nice to see, a top baker like you, really open to helping out people who are just trying to get in, because eventually we're going to want to decentralize more and more people are going to want to learn how to do it right. So very important to have the OGs around, I guess.
Yeah, we can never lose sight of that. There's always some pressure to centralize because sure, it's easier if there's one person that can decide, but if that's why you got into blockchain, you're in the wrong industry.
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of people, there's also kind of a financial interest to keep things, within their own clan as well. The next question that we want to move into is comparing infrastructure and scaling as a general term between what you do now and what were you doing at Coinbase before. So as we all know, Coinbase is kind of more of a mainstream platform. You can download an app on your phone. You can stake straight from your phone. Can you talk about the differences between the scaling work that you do now as a baker and block producer for a number of networks versus the more consumer targeted scaling that you were doing at Coinbase?
Yeah, I can certainly contrast a bit. And so I was there for about 3 years and I've been out for a while. So I'm not fully up to speed on everything happening there. But the best analogy I can give is we were really focused while I was there on building the bridge from Finance 1.0 to Finance 2.0. And so that's a critical bridge that I still believe we have to have. If the cryptocurrency world goes off and builds their own thing and it's so hard and bespoke that no one can use it, can they really accomplish some of the loftier goals of the space? I don't think so. So I'm still really supportive of what's going on over there. And there's a lot of people that I think really believe in the long-term mission of decentralization and access and sort of empowering more people. That's certainly what brought me there. So they're providing a really critical service for that. But the analogy I like is they're building the bridge from Finance 1.0 to Finance 2.0, and they're making a lot of progress along that bridge. What I do today is I just assume that bridge exists, and so we're just living entirely on the Finance 2.0 side. So we're working. Super crypto native is a term that gets thrown around way too much, but we live and breathe blockchain. We're not concerned about how do we package this in a beautiful interface. We're concerned about Tezos is meant to be the self-amending ledger. Okay, how do we help participate in amending the ledger? What should the next version of this look like without being encumbered by sort of existing connections and integrations to make? So those are the big differences, I think, because we also don't have a couple single panes of glass that we're bringing lots of users into. We can, again, just go real specific to each network. So I don't want to force Tezos to look like a Cosmos or someone else. I want to do what's best for Tezos within the Tezos world. And however the core devs want to keep it moving forward, we're going to want to keep pushing in that direction.
Speaking on moving forward, I know this is something that you have a lot of thought to. Rob, would you mind discussing the current states of open source contributions in Tezos and, just in general within the blockchain space?
Yeah, so there's an interesting trend that I kind of stumbled into here over the last year and a half, where the sort of original thesis we had when we were starting Polychain Labs was we're going to have a senior team of engineers coming into these new chains, and we're just going to help them wherever we can. We're going to open source, we're going to share, and we're not going to worry about being a little bit more efficient. We're just going to help the whole network move faster, and that's why we've tried to be pretty visible and supportive, and we're trying to continue and improve that too. But about a year and a half ago, I had open sourced our Tezos Network Monitor. I had open sourced our Tezos HSM Signer. I was working a lot with some developers and a lot of people in the community. And I was asked if I could help start reviewing some security proposals for grants on the network. And I thought, sure, if I can help, get more of the right things built, and help get the community moving faster, that would be great. And so as I was reviewing grants, I started to find myself asking pretty frequently, why is someone applying for a grant for this? This is just an open source project. Just go open source this. Let's get the community going. And after about maybe a couple dozen times of asking myself that, I started really thinking like, why don't we just have all of this happening out in the open, and why aren't we sharing a lot more? Why is everyone applying for a grant? And what it looked like to me was people were actually withholding innovations, thinking they could sort of get some cash out of this, instead of just going straight to open source. Mm-hmm. And I had a conversation with my team not too long after that, where we were working on some other projects, and we started talking about, well, maybe we can apply for a grant for this. And I thought, like, wait a minute, like, why aren't we just open sourcing this? Like, this isn't the thesis we started with. This isn't what a fully decentralized, really open community looks like to me. What's going on here? And so I've spoken to a lot of people about this, and I think one of the trends that keeps emerging was there have been a number of grants being shared, which is at its core a really valuable thing for the community. We want to make sure that if there's something critical missing and no one's working on it, we want to get that done and keep Tezos moving fast, because Tezos is still a relatively young chain. There's a lot more to be built, and we're not done yet. And I think this sort of position that we've gotten into, and I think a number of other chains have the same issue right now, is purely because the network has grown so quickly, and you don't have time to sort of get on top of everything as it's growing. We never had time to provide clarity about these are the 3 or 5 things that we really see that are missing. We don't think there's really a commercially viable use case here, but we still need to get this done. So we want to provide grants here, just like you would have an RFP proposal in some other industry. And so because it wasn't clear where grants were going to be provided, the rational assumption that an open source contributor can and really should make is, well, everything's fair game. So instead of open sourcing this thing that I'm proud of, let me just hold back on open sourcing for a couple of months, and let me see if I can get some cash out of this. I think that's frankly a mindset that started to grow. And, coming all the way back, when I think about a successful decentralized network and a community that's really sharing and accelerating the pace at which good ideas are coming in, I think those mindsets are really incompatible. And I think we really need to nip that in the bud. And there are a number of ways to address this. I don't claim to have the silver bullet here, but I think suffice it to say, we need to make sure people aren't withholding innovations because maybe they're going to get some cash. If you're not going to have grants for some project, just be clear about it and just let people open source directly. And then on the other side of that, if people are open sourcing and they end up building something people really use, and so what comes to mind are some of the payouts tools that have been built for the network that just loads of people have started to use, and I think started as an open source project. That's a huge success story. And I don't want someone to get a grant and maybe deliver a mediocre result and end up profiting more than the person that open sourced something that everyone starts to use in the community. So I think there's a number of issues there to address, and there's a lot of conversations happening now. I think suffice to say, people get the problem. People really care about addressing this. There's just 101 things that I think all of us in Tezos want to improve, like getting the next proposal out, getting the next proposals, scope a little more clear. So there's a lot happening, but this is something I'm pretty passionate about seeing addressed.
Right. And you said, somebody getting a grant and delivering a mediocre result, it's definitely right. I mean, the current incentivization, it definitely motivates people to kind of ask for money before they, start building it. I guess just going off on that, I believe it was shared recently on Reddit. The TF is going to start being a little more, transparent with the grant process. Rob, do you have some kind of ideas to fix these things and turn Tezos into a ecosystem with more healthy open source contributions?
Yeah, and just to be clear too, I don't think things are unhealthy right now. I think there's room to improve, and I think it's pretty important we figure it out soon so that we don't become really like a monolithic culture where you shall only work on what gets funded or
Exactly.
the winners that get chosen from on high. We really want to incentivize lots of ideas. So something we've been talking a lot about on the technical advisory committee that I joined not too long ago is learning from what some other chains have done and just being crisp about these are the strategic areas we really want to see new ideas in. There's also a number of things that some of the core dev teams, they just need to go off and build. We don't need to solicit 12 different teams, lots of ideas, and have a long process about this. There are some things the core devs should just go off and propose and research for the next proposal. But for the community and when it comes to the other side of grants here, we've been working on defining some working groups, we're calling them. And so the working groups are going to focus on specific areas. We're engaging the experts in those specific parts of the community. And the people on the TAC, I should mention, we all have, I believe it's a 6-month term. And I'm a really big fan of cycling through people on the TAC. I also don't want this to be a place where there's like the core council and they shall decide forever. So I'm super happy to see someone take my seat when my term expires and, keep getting new ideas in. But so we're splitting into working groups. We've got, I think, 6 of them right now. So those are cryptography, language support, reliability, security, token standards, and wallet indexers. Those are the working list of groups we've got. Those may evolve a little bit. And for each of those, we're going to try to be clear about this is where we think we're really in need of some new ideas from the community. If you've got a great idea, we'd love to recommend that something here get funded. And at the same time, if it's not on the list or if it's not one of the key areas, if you've got a great idea, you can certainly apply for a grant. We're not going to draw any hard lines. Like the most important thing here is we incentivize more innovation, get more good ideas. And so if you've got a good idea and it's pretty clear that there's a lot of other implementations, we don't think there's a need to fund it, well, that's fine. Just build it and go off and open source it, contribute to the community, build something great. If you want to apply for a grant, go for it. But I want to provide more clarity around what's likely to get funded so we don't keep injecting this, I think, unnecessary delay between having a great idea, writing code, and letting everyone in the community see it and share ideas and build on top of it.
Right. That's really interesting. And I actually really do think that this is not only a problem on this project, but also on a number of other ones that I've participated in or looked into. But do you think part of this actually has to do with the mentality that a lot of people come into blockchain and see these coins raised like a ton of cash, right? The Tezos Foundation, has 600 million or something in the bank?
Yeah,
and
that's about right.
Yeah, and then you have projects like, I won't name it, but they raised $4 billion, right, in their ICO back in 2017. So I feel like there's this mentality that people are thinking these projects have a lot of cash to spare. So by default, I'm going to go in and ask for cash first. I feel like in many successful open source projects out there in the world that aren't necessarily in blockchain, for example, WordPress, right? It's quite healthy, I would say. A lot of people use it. A lot of people are constantly contributing to it, and that's out of passion and not necessarily, I want to come in. The company who does most of the development on WordPress, I think they're valued at like $3 billion now or something. And certainly they also have a lot of cash. But through the growth of WordPress, because I think it was less accelerated than crypto, and it wasn't necessarily like, it didn't have the same amount of financial interest as crypto, I think. It was able to grow in a healthier way. I think long term, if we're talking about developer sustainability, the only way to go about that is really to get people passionate about it and to get past like that phase. Like, yes, there is a lot of cash just splashing around all over the place, but that does not mean that you can just come in and, you know, hold back your stuff and hope for cash first. And then it gets very messy, but it's definitely very interesting to see how open source is progressing in crypto versus outside crypto.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, you know, one way to look at this is when you get introduced to a new part of the Tezos community, do you want that to be filled with people that are there because they are really excited about what can come next? Or do you want people there because they're trying to make a quick buck off something? You know, I certainly have a preference there, but it's a really hard problem because there's still a lot to be built. We can't ask for people to just volunteer their time to get free development. There needs to be some real incentive. And at the end of the day, this is really all about incentives, just like so much of life and what makes proof of stake work in the first place. So certainly an area of research, and I just want to make sure people that are contributing great new ideas are appropriately rewarded for that. I want to make sure there's good consideration and sort of appreciation for people that are doing great, whether or not they submitted for a grant or not. If you do something great, I want to make sure that's recognized. I want to make sure you're appreciated for that and that we have a healthy community. And I also want to make sure the businesses that are being built here are not financed solely by the core pot of gold at the middle of this. People should be thinking about how do you build something that's independently sustainable? And there's certainly a chicken and egg problem of how to bootstrap that. But that's something we need to continue thinking about from both sides. Yeah,
this is very interesting. I think I'm going to write a post about this at some point. Yeah, you really got me thinking about this.
Yeah, please do. And if other people out there have other ideas, this is not a solved problem. It's not a black and white problem. So would love to hear from more people. If people want to share with you guys, share with me, share with anybody else affiliated. I think it's a topic we should just keep top of mind and ask ourselves, are we creating the right incentives to build a great community and to get great new ideas in place? Because we can't have, I don't think anybody knows exactly what Tezos should look like next year. And I think that's the best thing about Tezos. It's the self-amending ledger. We have the most, one of the more effective governance processes on chain. There's a lot of little things we can improve about that. But it's we should continue to be great because through collective action and through the crowd here, it should be some of the best ideas that make it into mainnet. And to get the best ideas, we need as many people as possible thinking big.
Yeah, I really think it really comes down to the developer journey, because when we're talking about incentives, that doesn't necessarily have to mean like cash or economic incentive, right? There's a lot of projects out there like WordPress, like Node.js and all of these other open source things where people contribute and their incentive is actually just happiness. I think it's interesting that so far it seems like that really hasn't been a possibility in the crypto space as much as I think a lot of people would like. And I'm not sure if it has something to do with just the journey of how someone who wants to contribute to the platform, like how do they find the platform? Because how I would often find out about new coins and stuff, I would join their chat group, right? And what's happening inside the chat group? It's just constant, like, when is this coin going to moon? We're going to pump next week. So I feel like some of that crypto mentality rubs off on people and it makes them think like, Like there's so much cash that's just floating around, and 10% this day, next week there's a 2x. I feel like some of that kind of leaks into people who are trying to get into the project and might sway the way that they think about how they want to contribute.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, boy. Something I've always lived by, and this is why I, in part, went to work for the JPL early in my career, was that work for things you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Never optimize for cash, and you'll almost always be happier and probably more financially successful that way too. Because when you're passionate about something, that's where you do your best work. And there's certainly a Maslow's hierarchy here, where if you don't have something to put food on the table, you're not going to be able to contribute higher order things to a network. So we certainly need to make sure there are well-paid developers in the Tezos community, and there are also great new ideas. So
right.
Hard problem. We need lots of new ideas. We need to solve both. And I think there will always be a ways to go. And I'm excited for some of the steps we're taking now.
Yeah, definitely a big topic to discuss. So the final topic that we wanted to get into is the upcoming 007 upgrade, and which will bring things like sapling that will allow smart contracts on Tezos to have a layer of privacy. And you have also a contentious topic that's been in the community lately, stateful baking, which essentially lets the baker separate their consensus key into 3 different parts. And there's quite a lot of implications from that, going from security down to the economics. I just want to get your insight into what you think about the upcoming upgrade.
Yeah, so one of the driving principles for all of this is the consensus mechanism, the economic or crypto economic structure, and the decentralization we've been able to create on Tezos today is not something that just happened. This was a very well designed and researched and thought out architecture that was put in place after a number of years, and right now it's working. And so any changes that are being proposed or made to the consensus layer, to how bakers work, to how much flexibility you have between bakers, these are all things that have to be studied, and we're not just going to see what happens in mainnet. So I will always recommend we vote against something that we don't think has been really thoroughly tested. Okay, so that's a guiding principle for us in all of that. So with that in mind, I also always want to see us thinking about how we can make things even better without breaking what's not broken. So one of the problems that I think we've seen a number of times on the network, and we've certainly had, is because when you launch a baker, it's tied to the implicit account that you're baking with. People delegate to that key. And if you have delegations, you're sort of stuck with that key for the lifetime of it.
Right.
And so in the case of our baking operation, for those that are also watching the network closely, you'll see we're really on our 3rd generation of baker, and each time we've done that, we've had to slowly wind down an old baker, bring up a new baker, do really large operations on chain with really valuable keys to move delegations across. And we've spent hundreds of hours working on this. And so I think about if we can save people hundreds of engineering hours and instead put those into higher order things on the network, like making better use of smart contracts and doing more interesting on-chain activities and writing more secure contracts and so on, I think that's a good way to make all of us more productive on the network and not lock us into existing keys. And we'll talk more about interesting new crypto primitives, like if we were to have BLS signature support, we could do more efficient signature packing, and we could have easier multi-sig operations. So there's a lot of interesting things that could happen there. So as a part of the 007 tentative proposal, which still isn't finalized, and that's important too. So there's still room to debate this. This would in part break out a baking key, which would look like a new SG1 key on the network from the implicit keys that are signing block production. And you would then be able to rotate that out. So what that would have allowed us to do, for example, is to migrate from migrate from the original signer we launched on the network into our second gen HSM back key and the third gen HSM back key that we're now working on.
Without all of that extra work. Yeah. Right.
Where today that's just not possible. So if you delegate it to our first baker, we'll just be shutting that down. And that's not a good user experience, because now users also have to be redelegating if they want to keep staying up with security upgrades that are happening. Right. So that's not a good user experience. I think there's a lot of time there I would like to get back. So breaking up the SG1 static baking key from the actual crypto key that's signing it, and then having a way to rotate through keys in a multi-sig contract that can sort of safely modify these. I think there are some really nice problems that solves. We just have to make sure we're doing the first piece, which is testing this really well, getting the crypto economic research right, and making sure the incentives are such that this is not going to cause us to regress on the network. And so I'd still like to see more of that research. I want to see more of this tested out on a thorough test net. But notionally, I think this is the right direction for us to move.
Do you know if there is any kind of testing for this going on right now?
Yeah, so I haven't been super involved with this, and this is a place I'll be spending a lot more time in the coming weeks. I know the Nomadic team is doing a killer job with this. I know the Cryptium team has also been really thoughtful about this.
Right.
I think in the Babylon upgrade, there wasn't the test infrastructure we'd like to see. So there's room here for us to improve the reliability, the testing. I would love to see more bandwidth for the teams to have a great test simulation environment for this. I'd love to see more crypto economic research for this to really back up through modeling that the incentives are still going to stay positive here. I'd also love to see more signaling on network. Actually, 007 should pave the way for with the new roles opcode. So I think we're doing all the right things, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, for such a big upgrade, you definitely don't want to rush it and wing it. Things can get really bad really quickly.
Yeah, especially with the pace we move today. If we mess up 007, we don't really want to have to wait 3 months to upgrade again, and we don't want to go through some kind of hot patch that we'd have to coordinate out of band. So it's really imperative we invest in getting this right.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, Rob, thank you so much for your time today. I think we got a great discussion going. Is there anything else that you wanted to chat about before we log off?
Oh, man. I think it's going to be an exciting year. I think if you've got big new ideas for the community, share them. 007 is supposed to be just the start of what's coming after that. So this is going to be laying the foundation for more interesting contracts on the network, tying contracts potentially at some point into baking and rewards. And I have not been this excited about the space in a long time. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun. Please keep sharing. And I'm going to try my best to help appreciate and appropriately reward people that are helping the space move forward.
Yeah, you heard the man. So if you're listening and you have some ideas, please share them. Will, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to share?
No, I don't have anything else to add on to that, but I'd like to thank Rob for taking the time to actually come on and chat.
Hey guys, can I ask before we break, we've all set our Zoom backgrounds to be a different kind of bread. Right? I've got a fresh Bodine bread sourdough baguette tray behind me. What kind of bread do you guys have?
I just went on Google and searched for bread, but it just looks like, a default loaf of white bread. That looks really good right now because it's lunchtime.
Does look
I just
delicious.
have good old fashioned dinner rolls.
Classic.
All right, Rob. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to speaking to you in the future.